The big impact that I see that affects, us or you as well, is that this realistically could take a lot of, it's the supply chain impact. This could take a lot of focus away from other areas, and it would then be repointed at, rethinking how you're manufacturing product, looking for new suppliers, all of the process around supply chain.
You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and re-platform specialist James Gedd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy at leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by Shopify. It's the first episode of 2025, so Happy New Year for all of those we've not spoken to yet. Ready to get cracking on an exciting content calendar for the year. We're starting off with a bit of a kind of strategic and macroeconomic and trend lens to kick off the year, looking at what's happening out there in the economy, what are some of the key things that are going to impact consumer confidence, consumer shopping strength, and then looking at the key trends that kind of sit off the back of this nicely and where we think brands are going to focus more this year. So let's start on the economy. We're going to split the first bit into two bits. Number one is basically our money, our moolah, and the second bit is around tariffs and supply chain, which is really important impact as well on in terms of capability. So the first bit on money is mortgage and interest rates, which a lot of people will be keen to see how this goes, because there are still millions of people who are expected to have to remortgage off of fixed rates onto new mortgage terms this year. And although interest rates are coming down, thankfully, they were a high of 5.25% last year. This is UK centric. They're predicted to fall to about 4% this year. They're still a lot higher than when people initially mortgage. So the Bank of England released reports and nearly half of UK mortgage holders will face higher monthly payment over the next 3 years, which obviously has a suppression impact on available spend. But also the housing market is warming up and house prices are up. And I've spoken to a few people who run estate agents, and they're saying that they're seeing greater interest in moving again in the end of last year into the start of this year. But the stamp duty threshold's coming down. It's halving, which means that there's going to be an added cost. So people are going to add £6,250 to a sale, to a purchase. So we've got all of these macro things that are going to actually impact people's wallet. So there's going to be positive impacts and negative impacts at the same time. The second one is inflation. And I think everyone will have had plenty over the last 12 months. It's almost like an obsession in the UK media and wider global media about inflationary impact. But it's coming down, thankfully, again, from a peak of 11% in October 22. It was 2.6% in November 24. We still got a bit of volatility from energy prices, like wholesale markets are impacting now. Energy price caps are going up, only marginally by 1%, but still this is cost added to household bills. For households that don't have a large amount of discretionary spend, any percentage point that takes that away impacts their spending power. And food inflation is the other big indicator for available spend. Thankfully, that's coming down. Again, it was a 19% in 2023. It's down to 1.9% end of last year. So inflation is looking more positive, but there are still some cost pressures in the market. But then the one thing that's generally countering that, which is really good news, is stronger wage growth, even though there's still ridiculous discrepancy between top and bottom tiers within businesses. There has been stronger wage growth. The annual wage growth was around 4.5% to 5% last year, but in real terms, that's about 2%. But at least that's better than the consecutive years where previously people have been actually having real terms wage decreases, which was being absolutely horrific. So that helps counter the impact of inflation, because even though inflation has fallen, prices are still going up, but wage growth is exceeding inflation at the moment. And that's expected to continue. So that's generally good. I don't know what your thoughts are, or what your takes on the market are, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, obviously really good summary of some of the influences. I'm probably not as well educated in some of those areas, to be honest, but I think definitely you can see a tangible impact on how people are spending money based on some of the major kind of things that have happened over the last couple of years. And everyone's been affected by things like mortgage rates, cost of food, a number of other areas. So yeah, I definitely think that'll help kind of the middle of the kind of spectrum when it comes to, because I feel like luxury, obviously, like some of the like really high end kind of areas have maybe been affected, but not necessarily as affected as that kind of middle ground. It feels like you've got your kind of critical purchases, things you're never going to reduce spend on. You've then got the things that, you know, are always going to sit in that bracket of like people are going to save up, people that, you know, see it as like see it in a certain way. And then that middle piece, like, you know, I put homeware in that market. Yeah. So I feel like, yeah, obviously really positive. And I think that's a good example of a market as well, that some of the things you talked about will start to have a more positive effects. I think that's probably the most extreme example of where COVID and, you know, increases in people moving drove masses of demand. And then it like really shot down as, you know, the economy got worse, people ended up less disposable income and people stopped moving. So yeah, I think that all sounds really positive. I think the US is an interesting one, which I don't think you were going to talk a bit about the tariffs, which I think is, you know, a major topic. But also I think like I've listened to a few podcasts over the break, and it sounds like people are pretty optimistic going into H1 next year, particularly as a result of the election and inflation in the US. So that's pretty positive. But yeah, I think that's kind of my view, to be honest. And like I said, I'm definitely less educated than you are, and a lot of people are, because I tend to avoid like a lot of the big picture topics and tend to just focus on like ecom, football, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think overall it feels like people are pretty positive going into Q1.
Yeah, the US is really interesting because internal US market confidence and expectations far higher, because we know Trump is unapologetically America first, impact on global trade second, even if actually that then impacts competitiveness for exports. But that means that the consumer confidence soars, and the consumer confidence, and even if it's based on SANS, which we don't know yet, consumer confidence drives spend, especially discretionary spend, whether that's around clothing, beauty, electricals, greater confidence in like like lifestyle based stuff like events, tickets, etc. Even products sectors like books go up when people are more confident. So it is interesting. We'll come on to the tariffs and why that's a potential red flag for non-US businesses. But yeah, I think you're right. The reason why I'm interested, I always follow these, and I'm not an economics expert. I mean, I might have done economics at A level, but I was quite happy to shelve it afterwards because it started getting a little bit too complex for my liking. But I think it's really important to understand how these events can shape consumer confidence. Consumer confidence impacts how e-commerce brands go to market, how they build value propositions, you know, even down to the messaging they use. Because if you can understand the sensitivities to consumers, you can talk to them better and market to them better. But I think the summary is generally more positive outlook. The increased confidence typically translates to higher spends. I know that I've read a report recently, consumer confidence across EU polled higher in end of last year than it did the previous year. So it's not just UK, it's going up across EU and US as well. But you were right about homewares. Like the buoyancy in the housing market will drive specific product areas, homewares, electricals, DIY. Now the interesting thing is, because you've got these other balances of, you've still got inflation, even though wages are going up above it. You've got macroeconomic challenges, energy prices going up. So even though confidence is going up, it's not like consumer confidence is like skyrocketing. So that has to be tempered with the reality that people are still facing financial pressure. Mortgages, loads of people are about to hit new higher rate mortgages, which is going to take chunks of. I think the average is like a couple of £100 extra a month. That's a sizable amount of money for people who aren't in that like, you know, more affluent consumer group. So the big thing that I know from conversations I was having last year with people is think about value proposition first, not just price. Because it's very easy to discount a price, but actually you can end up devaluing the product. And what consumers need to know when they're facing tougher purchase choices is, this is the right product, this is a quality product, this is going to last me, it's a good investment. I'm not going to buy something and regret it because it's crap and going to fall apart. So it's really important that people think not just about price at the moment, but they think about that storytelling, the value proposition, messaging, what's in it for the consumer. And I was having a conversation with the MD at Look Fabulous Forever, who's going to come on the podcast soon, yesterday about this, and she's saying that one of the big things they do at top of funnel is to educate people about the added benefit of the product, to help them realize that it's better suited to them. It gives them better quality outputs, and therefore that spend is a good use of their money. So I think that's why I think these macro trends are important, because it helps us to understand how we can then build that into our consumer proposition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's our kind of whistle stop tour of the macroeconomic, the what I call the moolah bit. Let's go on about tariffs and global supply chains. And Luke Hodgson, our good friend Luke Hodgson from Commerce Thinking, has written quite a bit about this towards the end of last year, and writes some really smart stuff. It's well worth following his newsletter as well. But the Trump tariff thing, I think, is really interesting. So he's bombastic, we know, and whether or not the full extent of his threat ever come to fruition is to be seen. But he's threatened tariffs of up to 20% on all goods imported into the US from UK and EU for countries like China, Mexico, etc., where he's really picking his battles even higher. I read somewhere an economic forecast that there's a potential hit of £22 billion to the UK economy, but that's not really in e-commerce industries. It's more like mining, fishing, etc. But the big thing that I think that people need to think about is, this isn't just, okay, you're selling an item via e-commerce to a country, to the US, but it's also, where is your manufacturing base, and where are you shipping from manufacturing into like third-party logistics, where you're going to have to pay these tariffs. So the cost of importing, if you've got a lot of manufacturing base in China and Mexico, which a lot of countries do, are in supply chains, could go through the roof. So auditing supply chains is more critical than ever to understand and building in flexibility. And I think that's one of the key things, isn't it? It's about flexibility in supply chains to help buffer the potential impact of these tariffs.
Yeah, I think I was listening to a podcast about this, or a podcast that talked quite a lot about this over the break. And I think the big impact that I see that affects, us or you as well, is that this realistically could take a lot of, it's the supply chain impact. This could take a lot of focus away from other areas, and it would then be repointed at, rethinking how you're manufacturing product, looking for new suppliers, all of the process around supply chain that's, going to come in anyway with a lot of the DPA stuff. But I think, it's just a lot. This could result in a huge amount of change more than anything else. And the other thing that, one of the topics that I was going to talk about later was cross-border, and you just said it as well in terms of the US economy. I think that one of the things that hasn't been talked about massively over the last few years, but that's driven a lot of the focus on international, is that a lot of countries, US included, have got a lot more comfortable with buying from other countries, and that's driven a lot of the growth in Japan, Middle East, are the two that I've been talking about. There's loads of others. And I think this will have a massive impact on that. And actually, you look at Japan and the Middle East and where they're buying from. I was reading a stat again over the break, but it was the US is massive part of it. So it's gonna be really interesting to see the impact, the wider impacts of this. But I could definitely see it, essentially taking focus away from other areas of a business for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think it's a really challenging one, isn't it? Because everything's about risk mitigation, and there's effort, there's cost, there's risk of inaction. And I guess for those who are testing the waters and where US is not a massive part of their business, probably a holding pattern to see what impact this is going to have on pricing is a more sensible approach than investing huge amounts of expenditure in refactoring supply chain. But if you're already generating millions and millions of revenue out of the US, you fundamentally have to build that resilience in now. And this links into our next point around global supply chain volatility anyway. Yeah. But from looking at the noises coming out of larger enterprises, that supply chain transformation is a big topic anyway within the businesses, because they recognize the need to. They've got to have greater resilience. And whether that means different partnerships with 3PLs to help to reduce the impact of this, or shifting entire manufacturing bases out of specific countries. It's going to be an interesting and testing 12 months, I think. But you're right, that the fact that a business, the money that a business has to invest across different areas is impacted by huge capital projects. And if there is a massive supply chain project, that's inevitably going to shrink overall budgets.
I think the other thing as well is the short-term impacts. I think that realistically, not everyone, or a lot of people that are, selling, or the majority of their revenues coming from Europe, they're not just going to go and change their suppliers or manufacturing processes straight away. But like when people go to like raise cash, for example, or like sell a business, or whatever else, quite a lot of if you're a European business, usually quite a lot of the focus and from the investors is, moving into the US market. And that's seen as a really big opportunity, particularly in like premium fashion. But like, for example, across a lot of our clients last year, one of the fastest growing markets, Canada, but that's not really seen as an opportunity because of the cost of fulfilling orders to Canada and it being a lot higher cost than the US. And obviously you don't have the same volume for the US. It makes the US really attractive. But if the US isn't as attractive for these brands and it's not seen as like, the obvious investment to kind of really hit scale, it's going to drive a lot of change.
Yes, it is. It is. So I think the key reason for flagging this is that it might not be our core audience, it might not be their area of expertise, but understanding what's happening within the business and I guess questioning the reliance of the supply chain for you to be able to hit your peak trading volumes is critical. And that links into the final point on the kind of the macro picture is global supply chains, because linked into this, we still have geopolitical instability, and part of me feels slightly sad that I'm talking about this on the impact of commerce, because the human impact is far more important, and what's happening to people around the world who are facing conflict is utterly disgraceful, and I hate it. But we're focused, we're not a humanitarian podcast, therefore we have to focus on the commerce angle. But you have Russia, Ukraine, you have Gaza, there are all these things where actually it's pulled in other people in the regions into like a conflict which is destabilizing key supply chain routes. And that's having multiple impacts. But one of the big ones is cost inflation. So seeing this in container prices going up massively from like the Far East into Europe to US. Hit a record of over $5,900 for a 40-foot container. It's fallen down to nearly 3,000 something now. So you can see just how volatile it is and the massive impact that makes on people's cost lines and their margin calculations when all of a sudden those container and freight costs go up. But equally, it's the unpredictability of having a container stuck somewhere. We've seen that out in the Red Sea and with the access to canals and getting stuff through. All of a sudden, a container you're expecting to drop is going to be 3-4 months late, and that's your stock for your new range launch gone. So there's a couple of really smart commentators in the US who talk a lot about, they're experts in supply chain, and they're saying that one of the biggest strategy shifts that they're seeing amongst larger businesses is anti-fragility supply chains. Love it. We've got to have buzzwords, haven't we, in ecom? So there's a new one for 2025, anti-fragility supply chain. But looking at either working with a main partner who can then subcontract and get integrated services across different travel networks from air, rail, ocean, etc., or diversifying with multiple partners that you can swap out depending on where issues might be. But the other thing which I think Luke flagged in a recent Luke flagged on your trends post that you put out on the Vivant blog this week is about actually more brands investing in robust inventory management solutions. So they are putting more money into the technology that can give them greater intelligence to help them foresee, plan ahead, and I guess plan around and mitigate the risk on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like I could go off on a bit of a tangent here, but I won't. We'll go into the next one and then I'll maybe refine that.
Oh, come on. You love tangents. What was your tangent going to be about?
Well, more like, I mean, you mentioned about kind of investing in the inventory side for that reason, but I would also say that one of the big trends I think we've seen over the last 3 or 6 months is investing in inventory from an order management perspective as well, and like just having a bit more like control over being able to facilitate for orders. So I think ship from store is a big one. I'm sure Stentra and Paul Smith will talk about this a lot, but I know they've had a really positive impact from that, which we've seen a little bit. Number of our other bigger clients are investing in tech around that at the moment, and being able to fulfill both sides just a bit more like in a bit more of a like structured way. And then being able to use inventory from like any stock location globally, but with a bit more of like a process and without an impact on your reporting and like real time like views of like where that inventory is and like the impact on orders and stuff like that. So yeah, I feel like that's a bit of a trend anyway. And I personally think there's obviously been a few OMS solutions that have raised a lot of cash recently. And, you know, it's an area where like Centra and Shopify are investing more money in from a platform perspective as well. So I think this year that will be, so like you and I have talked a lot about how cross-border is being commoditized over the last couple of years. I think some of this will be this year, next year. I think that will happen in this area as well.
Yeah, there's some complexities around this that I think sometimes surprise people. Some are obvious, some will surprise. But one classic one is when you're trying to get that true like borderless stock, where if you have an issue in one local inventory center that you can pull from another one, is that in some product sets you can't because the stock is different. Like electricals is a classic one. You couldn't ship an EU electrical into the UK because of the difference in the appliances and the products. And there's also different formulas in certain things, whether that's in pet food or beauty, certain ingredients that can't be sold in some markets and others. So the level of intelligence that's needed in certain businesses to make this work, I think is quite challenging. It's why it becomes like a real strategic project. But you're right, I mean, as a trend, it's 100% there, and it's definitely the right thing to focus on. I think the other bit that I see people get tripped up on is, so that's smarter inventory management. For example, when you know you've got a supply chain issue that's hitting your stock availability that's going to stop you landing your new range, there are certain things that people do by default, like, okay, well, we're going to turn off our paid ads because we don't have the product. But then you've got other areas of the business which aren't so automated or joined up, like marketing campaigns that are planned, which have got dependencies on specific stock availability dates, and having that granularity and visibility to know what the impact. And so I guess what do you see in terms of how people are trying to join the dots on that?
Well, I actually think so. Over the last few years, we've spoke loads about this, and like so we built a tool like maybe 3 or 4 years ago that was designed to log inventory change. And the reason for that was because the biggest impact on conversion for paid in general, but more Google Shopping, is the availability of the most popular sizes. So realistically, if you're small or medium is out of stock, your conversion rate will drop by 30-40%. And I think that goes completely unnoticed. Like, you know, people, because of the scale that you're operating at a lot of the time, you're not thinking about that influence. And in fashion in particular, that's massive, but also in lots of other industries, like the equivalent, where you've got a variant that, you know, is popular, and you're going to, you know, allocate more spend to your most popular product, but as soon as the inventory impacts it, the performance will get worse. So we've done it to a very small, low level. But I would say, actually, this is something that, a lot of people just don't see and don't realize is having such a big impact on marketing. So beyond just, so I'm talking about paid, it's most relevant to us, but I think it impacts loads of channels, obviously all the digital channels. So like you say, like brand awareness activity, whatever else. And this is the same thing with like conversion. I mean, there's so many influencers that make conversion rate less relevant these days anyway, but that's, you know, another one where people are doing CRO and then their two most popular SKUs will go out of stock, and then suddenly, you know, there's a huge variable. So that's why I think it's also really important to isolate one CRO for like new customers and understand all those variables, but also like some of the performance stuff.
Yeah, I think we could do an entire podcast on stock availability and fractional, because it impacts marketplace commerce as well. Like you get into like the likes of an Amazon, or, you know, Amazon's, Walmart's, whichever one, where you're selling through their retail channel, their e-com channel, and you get fractured stock and the impact that has on your listings and your digital store presence, and then how long it takes you to recover it afterwards. So we could go down the rabbit hole now. Let's now bring this back to the e-commerce trends that we think are going to be critical this year in the context of like the economy. So let's start the cross-border you've already mentioned. And I know you pulled it out in your blog, and I'm 100% on this. So the strand I'm going to pick up on is entering and scaling new markets, which is a theme you've spoken about a lot. For me, one of the key opportunities this year is tapping into less competitive markets in the EU for UK EU based businesses, or even US businesses that are selling in the EU, because the big markets people tend to always go after, and they are more competitive. Germany, France. I mean, most people start with one of those two, typically Germany. But there are interesting markets like Poland, for example, which has got a real fast growth, although it's behind in terms of volume, fast growth e-com industry. There's predicted compound growth rate of 10%, and user penetration is going to increase from 45% to 71% by 2029. But far fewer non-Polish brands operate there. I remember speaking to, I can't remember which conference I was at. I think it was a Tract or Crown Peaks one last year. And there's a lady there who's Polish native, and she was talking about cross-border and the fact that the Polish market is ripe for non-Polish brands because Polish consumers want alternative brands, but the level of availability is not there because people aren't seeing it as an important market. So I think smart e-com is going to look at picking off smaller but less competitive markets because it will be easier to get to scale in them.
So I think that makes sense. And another one that I hear people talk about quite a lot, where the growth and economy is positive at the moment, is Brazil. The only one thing I'd say amongst our clients, because I feel like we've had this conversation so much, is that I think you just need to have that category level demand there. Like, for example, if you try and sell particular premium fashion brand into Poland, you might just find that the consumer might prefer to buy from a Polish brand, or, they have there's a lot less kind of like in-market, recognition for this type of product or brand. So I think as part of that, like, initial research piece, you just need to like understand like the other channels, the consumer, like, what people are buying, etc. And I think also just make sure that market, there is that like cross-border kind of like comfortableness. So that I think with the Middle East and Japan being two good examples, they were essentially two markets that we saw growing massively across our clients in the fourth quarter. And then we've got 4 or 5 clients that are basically wanting to invest a lot more in those two markets, both from a retail and an e-com perspective. But both of them are growing super fast in terms of cross-border purchasing. They've both got really good economies. And I think you kind of just got to do your due diligence on that stuff, because I've also seen so many brands go after a market where, it's looked really positive, but actually they're just not really growing. Or it's been, really expensive to acquire a customer where there's just not, like, the consumers just aren't ready to buy yet. Whereas I think, our average client is basically obsessed with the US, which makes sense for obvious reasons. You then got Germany and France, which are Germany in particular is always pretty performant. France was pretty rubbish last year, but there's still some volume there. And then I think most people are like testing the waters with the Nordics, Australia, and a few other European markets. But for us, it's like, it's those 3, Japan and the Middle East, that are like the 3 big ones.
Yeah, and one of the most important considerations, because you're right, not every brand can be successful. For example, we're taking Poland as one example. So you have to do your consumer research, but it's also the legal framework and the business requirements for trading online, because some companies have very specific requirements. In Germany with its stringent application of privacy and data protection around double opt-ins. And then, like in Poland, people sell online have to have a phone number, at least last time I checked, which was in last year, are visible. Not all companies have phone lines, contact lines. So depending on what the local legal framework is, you may or may not be ready to enter into that market. So yes, 100% the sage advice is you have to do your market context analysis first. Let's move on to loyalty and referrals. It's a topic I know that We did a podcast before Christmas. I know you love talking about as well. The bit that two bits that I want you to build on, and I know you'll have lots of views on this, is number one is building value around accounts and the increased importance of online accounts within e-commerce platforms, and therefore vendors looking at the capability and connectivity. And then loyalty is strategic now. It's not tactile, just about giving points and discounts. It's seen as a strategic way of engaging with customers.
Yeah, so I think historically, like you say, a lot of people looked at loyalty as a route to basically capture more wallet and essentially encourage people to buy more frequently as a result of points and discounts and cashback and everything else. Whereas now, as you say, I think a lot of brands have started to see the value of having someone build an account, capturing more data, having them logged in, using that account through other channels to identify interactions with other channels, retail being the obvious one. But actually, there's been some interesting applications. So like Nike have an account integration with JD Sports. So you can log in with your Nike account and get a load of benefits that way. But I mean, that's like a real edge case. But overall, I think a lot of people are, having a real strategy, or like an account is part of a number of different strategies. So be that first party data capture, having people being logged in more, being able to better personalize, being able to better report on an individual and better track like behavior back to people or groups of people. Yeah, and then that kind of omni-channel piece. So I think that's one thing. And then I think loyalty generally, like people are just getting a bit more sophisticated. And it's difficult because we said this on a recent podcast where you've got unified commerce being this like horrible buzzword that isn't really needed. And then with loyalty, it feels like there kind of is one that's needed, because you've got kind of, VIP, you've got like proper clienteling, like individual person to person relationships drive more revenue. You've then got like an actual standard loyalty program, and then you've got like incentivized actions to drive certain actions. And actually I think there is a broader word needed, because if I go into a luxury brand and talk about giving someone that's bought 3 times certain benefits, certain reasons to come back to the site more often, certain reasons to engage more with the brand, that they're more likely to get that 4th purchase. If you use the word loyalty, they're going to immediately not be interested, versus, clienteling or whatever else. So yeah, basically I think loyalty is, at the heart of a lot of people's existing customer retention strategies right now. People are thinking broader. It's a lot more, wide reaching. But yeah, it's definitely, I would say, second to international on our clients' focus lists at the moment.
Yeah. I'm seeing it, but I'm also seeing the loyalty discussion not just talk about programs and let's get a software. Now, obviously, a lot of your loyalty strategies end up using a specialist third-party loyalty platform, because to build it yourself custom is expensive, and it takes a certain type of business and a certain size to be able to justify that. But the starting point is more about the value prop, the consumer behavior that you want to reward and encourage. And also some of this is about surprise and delight, especially in the premium sector, is if we take like the concept of a VIP, is a VIP just being told they've got £10 to spend because they've earned 300 points doesn't resonate. But a VIP gets in an exclusive event or an exclusive product drop ahead of other. There's things that go above and beyond, or be it whatever it might be. I remember seeing a brand years ago, 3 people in the US who picked out one of their most loyal shoppers and invited them to on a shopping spree where they got, I think it was however many $100 free of clothing, and then did a photo shoot. They took them out, they hired out this luxury yacht, they gave them the full VIP day experience and made them feel like a queen for the day. And that then translated into really cool UGC, blog content, social content, and it was a great way of community building through loyalty mechanisms. So I think it's just more intelligence around what loyalty means is definitely Definitely.
Well, someone from our team was saying yesterday, I mean, I think the other thing is community and loyalty are just going hand in hand, because I think everyone wants to invest loads in community, but it's quite hard to drive or quite hard to justify and like measure and report back. Whereas I think if you can tie that back to loyalty, usually there's a bit more of like a measurement framework behind it. But I think combining the brands that have done this best, as you say, you might not even call it loyalty, like Represent do loads of stuff where, you know, their VIPs are having these like really cool like engagements with the founders, or doing these really cool like, you know, physical events and stuff. And I think, you know, it all ties back to loyalty, but it is community strategy at the same time. So I think it's that combination that makes it most effective.
100%, 100%. And it's really, everything comes back to understanding the consumer, like what motivates and what drives them to behave in certain ways. And I've got a really nice example on a tangent from my local football club that my son's a member of, and actually they build loyalty to the club really, really well, because not only are they very good at communicating the updates that come out, the information about the club, the transparency of what they're doing, but they understand that community, as in local community, is important to a lot of people, because we're at Ascot United, the catchment area is pretty large, but people like the area. And so they do lots of positive things, whether it's charitable, supporting local enterprises. They've just launched a new initiative for older audience who might not be able to play competitively football, but want to get out and do some exercise of walking football. So they're encouraging people, you know, do you know any parents, grandparents who might want to get out, socialize, have some fun, but not do anything too strenuous? All these new initiatives that make you go, wow, do you know what? You're thinking about the value you're adding to the community, to us, etc. And it's not just about points, prizes, rewards. Sometimes it's about investment in initiatives that resonate with the audience. And, you know, brands like Patagonia have been really strong on this for a long, long time. So I think we should, and I'm hoping we will start to see more loyalty stuff. You're right. This is the loyalty community convergence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to talk about subscriptions, but I'm not. Do you know what? I'm not going to, simply because subscriptions, I don't think it's going to be a key trend. I think those who are a subscription business and those for whom subscriptions is a logical play will continue to do it. But I don't see lots of other brands rushing into launching subscriptions if they don't already have a model set up. And I think it's probably becoming harder to get people to buy into it unless you have a product that you buy. Pet food's a classic example. Once you buy into a pet food brand and your dog, cat, etc. likes it, then you'll happily buy it on replenishment and it's a convenience thing. But I don't know about you, but I think subscriptions will still be important, but I don't see it as a burning trend in 25.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only one thing I'd say, I think there's definitely, like, and this isn't a trend, but I think in a lot of businesses, people are trying to think about a way of getting more recurring revenue or more regular revenue from a customer through like a membership, for example, or, you know, like a lower price point product that's being purchased more regularly. But I don't think it's subscription. I think that's more just a strategy of having like more touch points with customers and lower barrier to entry products. And yeah,
and I think for those brands who have regular purchase cycles where the product set lends itself, so especially if you're a multi-brand retailer or you're a department store, then delivery and return subscription mechanisms for me is probably the stronger play there, because if you can get people to understand the value of, actually, if I pay for a delivery package, I'm saving a lot of money, then you get people into more regular purchasing through you, and then there's greater friction to change and greater effort to change, which is why Amazon Prime has been successful and why so many businesses have copied it to various guises. I'm not going to drill into the marketing stuff because I want us to do a separate pod around digital marketing trends, how this is emerging. There's so much to unpack there that we can't rush it in today's, and I think it's just a separate enough topic. But I think the last one I picked out in terms of commerce trends is about payments and flexible payments. Coming back to that economic situation, I buy now, pay later. There's continued growth in usage across EU. I think it's due to grow at 11.5% across the EU from 24 to 2030. and this isn't like new, but I think what businesses need to think about is, how do they communicate the buy now, pay later proposition to customers? It shouldn't be used to try and hoodwink people into purchase stuff they're not able to afford, but the ability to help people manage their finances better and spread payments is actually quite positive, because people have the funds, but not in one lump sum. But I think the way that it's communicated, embedded into user journeys is where there's a lot of opportunity. Some sites do it really well, where they communicate it through from category to PDP to checkout. Others, it literally is just an option in the checkout, and then you expect people to understand the benefit.
Yeah, I think so. I hate buy now, pay later. I think overall, like in a lot of cases, brands will be paying a really high fee for it, and there's usually not huge amounts of incrementality. And I also think it's obviously bad for consumers in a lot of ways. However, I do think it's a necessary evil. I personally think there's space there, someone to offer like a consumer finance solution that is super flexible, like a bit more premium, maybe a little bit better for the brand. I don't know, I feel like there's room for someone to disrupt that market a little bit. But like, for example, Klarna, you've got very little flexibility around how that's positioned. It's not super, like, it's a bit cheap. Yeah, and I think obviously like the one that will win will be the one that offers the consumer the best options that will then create the demand that then will force the brands to use it. But I just feel like there's room for change in that market. And at the minute, there's a bit of like, one, obviously consumers are using these solutions and just ending up in debt. And two, brands are often paying 5%. And then they're actually not really getting any incremental value. It's more that they're just, a lot of customers are seeing it and thinking it's an easy way to purchase. So I feel like there's like a bit of a lose-lose, and there's room for it to be slightly less lose.
Yeah, it's a good point, and that's, we always aim to put a fair and balanced view out there. I guess I'm not quite as negative on buy now, pay later, because I've seen it tested on a few sites, and it has had a positive impact on conversion rate. The consumer affordability bit, I'm 100% with, and it always worries me. But I think the most important thing here is there are people who can afford to buy stuff, but they don't have the cash to buy it in one go, and actually splitting it across 4 paydays where they have the cash, but they can't. They need to do it across those multiple payments, can actually be really beneficial to people, because it helps them to buy what they want or need, and do it affordably, rather than maybe taking out. You go down the worst route option is loans, which have really expensive interest rates, so the consumer takes the hit rather than the retailer. And I think retailers can factor into their margin. I agree on the fact that if there are more premium options out there. I mean, some high-end jewelry have gone down the road. There's things like, I remember a few years back using Hitachi Finance Group for it as a loan basing. But you go through, and I guess it's the level of complexity of the application and how long it takes has a big impact on those people who are willing to go through that process. So there's a real trade-off, I think, between maybe having a more sophisticated setup and actually potentially losing people because of the effort to go through that and the blocking of people. So yeah, it's a bit of a fine balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything else that you want to pull out in terms of a key trail before we draw this one to a close?
I was going to say, we're running out of time. So I think in my little article, I called out the big commerce thing, but I don't think that'll surprise anyone. I think commerce tools is an interesting one. A lot of change there, a lot of question marks. So yeah, I feel like that'll be an interesting one. And then I think from a marketing perspective, in fact, I don't think it's even worth going into that because there's so many different things. But yeah, I feel like we covered a good mix.
Yeah, what we will do, as a little teaser to people, is we'll do a digital marketing focus one coming up around what are the key trends that emerge in which channels are growing fast and where, what's the market variance between regions, what are the tactics that are going to help people win, and like what is the tech that's going to help people make this more profitable and easier to process, because that is a big discussion. It's not something we can shoehorn into a couple of minutes at the end of this podcast. So that's our whistle stop tour. I hope you found it useful. And do let us know, like, anything you disagree with, anything we said that really resonates. What are the key like market factors and trends that you think are going to really impact e-commerce this year. We'd love to hear. Please do add comments to our LinkedIn post or just DM me and Paul. And thanks again for listening. Until next week, everyone. You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.